I always knew I wanted to be a mother. From a young age, I was really good with kids. I became the neighborhood babysitter when I was 12, and I knew that being a mother was a life experience I really, really wanted. When I was 16, my high school boyfriend crashed his mother's Mercedes into the stop sign outside of my house. He had a temper, often getting mad at me for something I did or didn't do, and a trust fund, so his network of well-connected family friends was large. He wasn't going fast enough that night to get hurt, but the wreck was bad, he had been drinking, and the police were on their way. When his best friend's father showed up to clean things up, I overheard the man say to him, "Why are you so in love with this girl? You know you can't marry her. Her father is schizophrenic. You can never have kids with her. Your kids will be crazy too." I had just heard the most powerful person I knew say my greatest fear out loud, that because of a label, one my father didn't choose, I might never have a family. Labels are powerful. Actually, that's not true. Labels are not powerful. It's the emotions they elicit in us that have the power to change the way we see a person or a situation instantaneously. Consider labels like doctor, rock star, hero. These words signal health, happiness, safety, so we think of them as positive. Words like thief, villain, crazy tell us to keep our distance, so we think of them as negative. Our emotional response to positive words might range from empathy to celebration, but for negative words, they're much more harmful and can range anywhere from sympathy or discomfort at best to hate or genocide at worst. When we use a negative label to define someone and then judge or devalue them for it, that is the definition of stigma. As a documentary filmmaker, I have interviewed hundreds of people living with stigmatized conditions, and I'm here today to tell you that we have the power to eliminate stigma, and it doesn't look like you think it will. All right, I want you to be honest. Did you judge the man in the story I told you? I did, and for a very long time. Judging people doesn't feel good, but we all do it, and it comes pretty naturally. Why is that? When we judge, our beautiful, complicated brains take over, and our amygdala, that part that controls emotional and social behavior, tells us that something might be dangerous. It activates, and our brain assigns words and labels to what we're experiencing based on previous experience we've had and our emotional state at that time. These words, this process happens in milliseconds, and it influences our actions that follow. This neurological process is rooted in our biological need to connect as human beings. As early humans, being able to live in an effective group was directly related to our ability to survive, meaning that maintaining the health and safety of the group was a life or death proposition. If something or someone threatened the group, we labeled it and we stigmatized it. So this wiring, this emotional response to a perceived threat is inside all of us. And so to be really clear, we're wired to judge. That's why it comes so naturally. But the good news is that you are in full control of the actions you take after you judge. But controlling those actions requires a willingness to reflect. So I'm going to ask you all to do an exercise with me. Please close your eyes. And I want you to imagine a woman based on the labels I'm going to use to describe her. Cold, lazy, selfish, weak, bad mother. What does she look like? What expressions is she making? And what emotions are you feeling as you picture her? Please open your eyes. I want to show you who I'm talking about. As you can see, the woman I used these harsh labels to describe was me. I said these words to myself in the weeks that followed the hardest 2 months of my life. 6 weeks after my best friend died of cancer at the start of the pandemic, my only child was diagnosed with autism, level 2.5, meaning he would need very significant support. I was mourning my friend. I was terrified. And I knew absolutely nothing about autism or how I was going to support my son in the way that he needed. In my weakest moments, I had thoughts like, why did this happen to me? Maybe he's not actually autistic. I wonder if there's a cure. I told myself in these moments that this wasn't something bad happening to me. This was my child, who I loved, and he deserved better than my fear and my judgment. But most days, the story I told myself sounded like this: you're a monster. What kind of mother doesn't love her kid exactly as he is? And what would people think if they knew what you were actually thinking? My shame about the thoughts I was having kept me quiet. I told no one, and I convinced myself that I was completely alone in this experience. It took me a long time to forgive myself for the thoughts I had before I understood what I was experiencing. Even these days, despite a lot of work on self-love, I'll have moments where I'm feeling really grateful for River, and a voice inside me sneaks up and whispers, "Don't forget, you were in denial. You wished a part of your son's identity would go away. You're a bad mother." We judge others easily, but there is no one we judge more harshly than ourselves. So if you are in this audience right now, and something in your life is making you talk to yourself the way that I told you that I have, please know this: you're not a monster. You might just be afraid, and you are most definitely not alone. I finally forgave myself in the summer of 2021, and I stopped judging, and it didn't happen through traditional methods of healing like medication, meditation, or therapy. It happened through storytelling. After my son's diagnosis, I went all in, trying to figure out a way to influence the world to see him as more than just a misunderstood label. And I found peer-reviewed research that said that the most powerful way to combat stigma was through media campaigns, where people shared their lived experiences. As a documentary filmmaker, I knew that I had the background to be able to contribute stories to the public conversation about mental health and shift people's perspectives. So over the course of 3 years, I interviewed over 200 people who lived with stigmatized conditions. And I asked them to tell me what it was like to live with labels that people judge and devalue. I shared these stories on social media, and I even built an app called Stigma to host the stories and empower people to ask for messages of hope from strangers who shared their lived experiences. This vision and goal I had to normalize conversations about mental health through storytelling was something the world noticed. And in 2022, 3 months after launching the app, I got a message from Google. They told me they were naming Stigma the best app for good of the year. The visibility the Google Award got us exponentially increased the number of people using the app. Our videos of real people sharing their stories were viewed millions of times across social media. And most importantly, we inspired people who were struggling in silence to reach out and ask for help. While the Stigma app no longer exists, it taught me a really important lesson. When we talk about stigma, it's important to be specific about the type of stigma that we mean. Research told me that media was the way to eliminate stigma. And if the comment section of our social media posts were right, or kind of were an indicator, that research was right. was a beautiful comment section, which almost never happens. But that type of stigma was social stigma. That's the negative beliefs and discrimination that is directed at individuals by society at large. And it wasn't until one of my subjects that I had interviewed sent me a message a year after her interview that I realized the much more powerful impact our stories have. Thank you for helping me share my story, her email said. I've had a really hard last couple of months, and I wanted to tell you that every time I'm feeling low, I watch that video you made of me, and I remind myself that that is also me. It was really hard to measure if society was judging people less, but I continued to see proof that people who shared their stories publicly were judging themselves less. And this was a much more important type of stigma. Self-stigma is when we absorb and adopt the negative attitudes that society has placed on labels that we carry. It leads to shame, low self-esteem, and most dangerously, it reduces our willingness to ask for help. For 3 years of my life, I got to be a mirror to brave and misunderstood people, showing them the strongest and most beautiful versions of themselves. The process of sharing their stories and then having those stories to come back to as proof that they were strong in moments they felt weak ended up being an incredible antidote to self-stigma. And the reason is that our realities are shaped by the stories we tell ourselves. So I want to ask you, what stories are you telling yourself right now? What labels are you using to describe yourself? Are they positive or are they negative? And what might you achieve when you stop judging yourself? At the end of every interview, I asked every participant the same question. What made you say yes to sharing something so vulnerable in such a wildly public way? For the record, I asked myself that question backstage like 8 times before I came out here. Every person answered some version of the same question. If sharing my story means that one person who feels alone feels hope, it will have been worth it. Hope. Thank you, hope. Hope is another really misunderstood label. Most people think of hope as a feeling or an emotion, a synonym for optimism. But research of mental health experts tells us otherwise. Hope is a skill, and like all skills, it's something you have to practice. Practicing hope is simple, and it looks like this. First, accept reality. Then, choose to believe that your actions will make things better for yourself or for others. Those 200 people that I interviewed who shared their stories were practicing hope. In fact, they were crowdsourcing hope for people who were struggling in silence and didn't yet have the courage or the vocabulary to express what they were feeling. Those people, those subjects who shared their stories, shared them, they accepted their labels, they accepted their diagnoses, and then they chose to believe that sharing their stories would make things better for others. But what we all learned over those 3 years was that the people they were making things better for the most were themselves. Stigma is when we use a negative label to define someone and then judge or devalue them for it. And there is no one we do this to more than ourselves. A few minutes ago, I shared with you some of the negative labels I used to describe myself in the wake of some really hard life events. I want to share with you the ones I use now. I am a kind, curious, loving, resilient, badass single mother. I accept the hard parts about my life, and I choose to believe that sharing our stories is the key to eliminating stigma. Every person in this room has the power to eliminate stigma, and it's not going to happen with a campaign on TV or billboards. It's going to happen inside of each of you. When you find yourself judging, remind yourself that it's a signal. It's your brain's way of telling you that you're experiencing something that you fear or you don't understand. And it's a perfect time to practice hope. Accept reality. Say to yourself, I am judging, because you know when you're doing it. And then try really hard not to label. And instead, do as my favorite mental health advocate, Ted Lasso, would do. Just be curious. I set out to build a better world for my son, and in doing the work, I got a glimpse of one. It is a kinder world, one full of self-acceptance and accountability for the ways in which our fears lead us to judge. I have watched stigma disappear simply by practicing hope. So I'm here today to ask you to join me in crowdsourcing hope so that this world is brighter for everyone who is misunderstood. Thank you.